You can either vote for Democrat mob rule or you can vote for a Republican Party that stands proudly for law and order, fairness, freedom, and justice.
Our values are being shredded. Our democracy is under assault. A president has put his own interests before those of our ideals.
That was President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden making their midterm pitches in Kentucky. But could it end up being a preview of the 2020 campaign? We have brand new CNN polling that shows Democrats' top choice to face off against Trump is former Vice President Joe Biden. He is leading a crowded field, as you can see, including Senators Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and Elizabeth Warren. Now, that same poll has some good news for the president, showing more and more Americans think he will win a second term in office. Joining us now, our CNN senior political analysts, David Gergen, a former advisor to 4 presidents, and Ron Brownstein, senior editor for The Atlantic. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. David, is the goal for Democrats to try and find someone who can match Trump's charisma and celebrity, or do you think it's better to go in the total opposite direction and say this is a serious job for a serious person?
Well, first of all, I think the goal of the Democrats is to win the midterm elections. That's going to shape a lot of other things, including the way the country is governed over the next 2 years. And that if the Democrats can win the House, they can have a serious voice in the governing, and that will be a run-up to the 2020 election. I've always believed, Anna, when you're in the out party, the first thing you ought to be doing is what are your main goals? What are your policy goals? What's your message? And then find the candidate who best fits that message, rather than sort of, turning one way or another way to see how Kamala Harris fits. Is she ready yet? Is Cory Booker too hot, or is he really very convincing, or all the rest of it? What you need to do, and what has been central to people who have won when a party has come out of the wilderness, is having a very strong message of change and what they want to change to. And I think the Democrats, even though they're ahead right now, don't have that message yet, even though they're ahead for the House seats. But the next 2 years are going to be crucial for that.
Ron, in recent weeks, we've been discussing women and how women voters could be the key to victory in the midterms. You wrote a fascinating analysis for CNN.com this week in the wake of the Supreme Court nomination fight, writing that it revealed, quote, the persistence of deep differences among women, especially white women, about growing female assertiveness in society and the uprising against sexual harassment symbolized by the Me Too movement. Ron, what does your research tell you about how much women themselves are embracing evolving gender roles?
Well, look, I mean, I think one of the big mistakes in political journalism always is to treat women as a monolith. It's kind of silly on its face. I mean, such a big share of the population. There are big differences among women and between different groups of women about politics, about policy, but also about the changing role of women in society. And what we saw in 2016 in the post-election polling very clearly is that Donald Trump did best among the women, particularly white women, evangelical women, blue-collar women, who are the most uneasy about the changing roles of women in society, more women working outside of the home, more likely to say that makes it tougher to have a successful marriage or to raise kids. There is a constituency for that. And I think, as we saw in the Kavanaugh fight and in the aftermath, there is a divide among women about what all of this has meant. And if you play this forward into the election, it kind of reinforces the basic trend we're in, which is where Democrats are doing very well in white-collar suburbs around the major metropolitan areas and may make historic gains there, powered in part because they are amassing the biggest margins they ever have among college-educated white women. On the other hand, outside of the metro areas, the going is much tougher for Democrats. The gains may be much smaller, and that's in part because even though they're making some gains, they're not doing nearly as well among those blue-collar white women as they are among their college counterparts. And that goes all the way back, I think, at the core to these different roles about kind of changing, lots of different changes, cultural changes in society.
Right. David, do you think that's why the president is playing up this new message that it's a scary time to be a young man? Moms should be afraid for their sons. Perhaps he has tapped into the discomfort that some people, both men and women, have about the changing times?
Oh, absolutely. This is what he did in 2016 very effectively. He played upon the anxieties and the prejudices, frankly, of a large segment of the population. That's how he got his victory. And he's returning to that theme now. I do think that Ron is onto something about women are not monolithic, and many of them are struggling to find their roles. I think they're doing it more successfully. It's the guys right now who are, I think, struggling more with what it means to be a man these days in America. It was really interesting. I mean, I thought of all the craziness of Kanye West visit the Oval Office, there was something interesting he said, and that is, I grew up without a dad, and I never thought of myself as much of a man, but now when I put this hat on, this Trump hat on, I feel empowered. I feel like I'm a man again. And I keep wondering, is that one of the things that's sort of a hidden driver behind some of the support for Trump, is that he seems to communicate to guys a kind of manliness or masculinity that they can maybe claim for themselves.
That's so interesting. Ron, I want to ask, do you want to chime in? Go ahead.
Just real quick, I was going to say that, in general, I mean, the basic Trump appeal has always been strongest to the voters who are uneasy about every form of change. We focus a lot on demographic and racial change, but it's also economic change, it's cultural change, and what we're seeing here is that it's also the change in gender roles, and that is not only men who are kind of recoiling from that in some cases, but also, elements of women. The flip side is that Democrats now are, because I think of the backlash against Trump, are improving their position among the voters in the parts of the country that are the most comfortable with what America is evolving into. And I think after this election, you are going to see a level of Democratic dominance in the House inside the major metro areas that is probably unprecedented in modern times.
There have been these high-profile Democrats recently making headlines this week for offering their take on what the party's midterm messaging should be. And I want to take a quick listen.
Michelle says that, when they go low, we go high. No. When they go low, we kick them.
You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for, what you care about.
Fear is not it's not a proper motivator. Hope wins out.
We've been talking about a kind of search for identity, and it seems that Democrats are searching for a united message, and there's a divide right now about how to best counter the messaging coming from Trump specifically. David, what do you think is the answer?
Well, listen, I happen to believe that Democrats need to be a lot tougher than they've been. I think that they've tried so hard to reach bipartisan solutions, to work across the aisle. Some Republicans have done that too, but by and large, they're facing a man who believes in strength, and if you make a gesture of trying to be sort of, well, let's work it out, he sees that as a sign of weakness, and he'll try to roll over you. And I do think that Hillary Clinton is the wrong messenger for this message, but I think her message is right. And that is that the Democrats need to toughen up. I thought Eric Holder was in the same school, but when he got to the line about let's kick them when they're down, that to me was that was a blunder. It fed into the Trump narrative, that it's become mob rule and that sort of thing, which I don't think is true, but it lends some credence to that.